It is also about putting Indian forces first. It is about putting the tricolor first. What does nation first mean to you? Send us your thoughts on video via WhatsApp on 730-4434-381 or upload it on your social media handle with the hashtag Nation First. We'll take some of your videos on air and the sharpest responses will get limited edition Republic merchandise from us with a surprise.
Half-truths and half-baked facts have been the defining nature of the digital news media ecosystem in India. Agenda-driven cabals masquerading as journalists for decades who spend more time in crafted narrative building against the nation than contribute an iota of journalism. Foreign-funded outfits with interests that go against everything that India stands for. It's time for all of it to change, and it shall. This July, it's digital first, nation first, republic first. For too long, there's been a free
trending burning question powered by Reva University, NECC and Century Ply.
Welcome back, friends, to this section of Trending Burning Question, where we are discussing what's up with China. A serious case of burn at what's happening between India and the United States. And that's the reason why perhaps on the eve of Prime Minister Modi's visit to Washington, D.C. and his state visit, China blocks designation of Sajid Mir, the mastermind, the plotter of 26/11 terror attacks in Mumbai in 2008 from being designated as a global terrorist under the 1267 Sanctions Committee of the United Nations. Not the first time, of course, the Chinese are doing this. They think they are obliging Pakistan, but then they don't realize that the world sees them as backing not just one terrorist, but a terrorist state. In fact, the philosophy of terrorism with their actions. We'll discuss that. Joining me here in the studios, Aarti Tikku Singh. Also joining us from DC, Ambassador Pradeep Kapoor, former Secretary, Minister of External Affairs. He now works as an international strategic affairs advisor from Washington, D.C. Also joining us, retired Colonel Rich Outzen. He is a senior fellow at Atlantic Council and Jamestown Foundation. And if I could begin with you, Colonel, are we really that helpless? Is America that helpless? Can't we together do something about this Chinese nuisance of backing a terrorist, not just a terrorist, but a terrorist state?
Good to be with you. And I think we need to make a distinction here between being helpless on the ground and being helpless in the halls of the United Nations. So as you're aware, India, the United States, other countries in the West that have terror problems have their own unilateral sanctions programs. They have some cooperative sanctions, multilateral. It is always a good thing to have the broadest possible set of sanctions, and that means UN as well. But of course, China has the right to veto things that come in certain formats within the United Nations. So the UN in the US experience has not always been the best tool for fighting terror. I would say what's important here is not that China is supporting Pakistan by refusing to brand this terrorist as a global terrorist, because that's to be expected given their relationship. And as you know, with our relationship with Pakistan over Al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden and his long residence in Pakistan, this is not really that surprising to the United States. But that doesn't mean we're helpless. What it does mean is that countries like India and the United States and our European allies have to tighten counter-terror cooperation and not expect that countries who have a very different vision of the world community, like China, like Russia, like Iran in the United States view, that they are simply not going to cooperate against some of the world's worst terrorists. But we can do it amongst what we call the coalition of the willing, and India and the United States cooperation is incredibly important there.
I understand what you mean, Colonel. You know, it is a difficult territory to negotiate with the fact that we have not been even able to decide on a globally accepted definition of terrorism at the United Nations. That's really the unfortunate part. Are we really failing the victims? I'm told we are also joined in by Inar Tengen, I believe. Inar Tengen, live from Beijing, and he's a political affairs commentator. If I could go to you, Inar, what's really up with China? You think Beijing is very comfortable with the world community, seeing them standing with Pakistan, backing these terrorists, blocking their designation at the UNSC? Whenever these votes have happened to declare any of these terrorists a globally designated terrorist under the 1267 Sanctions Committee, it's been 14 versus 1. Of the 15 members of the UNSC voting, 14 have voted in all the cases on one side and only China on the other, not even Russia with them. Do the Chinese realize the kind of isolation, the kind of ignominy they face, or do they even care?
Well, I think from China's point of view, what they want to see is more dialogue between the parties. I mean, designating him a terrorist is not going to change the situation. And there are competing claims by Pakistan against India.
That's a facetious argument, if I could say. Number one, things do change if this global designation happens because the funding channels get blocked. Pakistan goes back to the FATF grey list, and it becomes difficult to do this business of terrorism as state policy. Also, Pakistan does not have any counterclaims whatsoever on India, and on that, I'll get in our ambassador there, Mr. Kapoor, from Washington, D.C. You know, this argument, this narrative that, Pakistan also have some claims, counterclaims on India. How much water does this hold really when in all these votes that I mentioned, sir, 14 or 15 people vote on one side. They want these people to be declared terrorists under the 1267 committee, and only China stands alone.
Abhishek, thank you very much for bringing me into this conversation. Your voice, unfortunately, on my computer seems to be fading in and out. So I've heard
have to unmute yourself.
Most of it, but
we're
not
not able
all
to
of it.
Hear you.
So if I go a little off
yourself, you're getting me, sir.
Scripted requirements of the conversation, do let me know. But what I would like to say is as follows. This has happened earlier also on other cases of terrorists who were to be nominated as terrorists by the UN. India continued to bring a lot of pressure on China. It is very, very unfortunate for a country like China to be supporting terrorists and to be supporting a state which supports terrorism, which is the epicenter of terrorism, when the whole world knows what is happening in Pakistan. Now, for Pakistan to say that about India is a very laughable matter, really, because nobody in the world agrees to that except maybe China. I don't know to what extent they really feel about it in their hearts, but at least they say it on their lips, maybe without any substance, just to give some credence to a failing state or a failed state like Pakistan, which the whole world is denigrating and complaining about. And they are a country which is going around with a begging bowl all over the world. And any country which tries to help them will also get into a difficult situation as far as I can see because of their non-stop support for terrorism, which has brought them to this situation where all the money and aid that they've got in the last 75 years has been misutilized toward the wrong ends and wrong channels for corruption and for terrorism. So, in my opinion, it is a moment actually for India and US to celebrate. They're coming together, their convergence on so many issues. Prime Minister Modi is in the US. The India-US relationship is on the path to becoming the defining partnership of the 21st century. China has to be called out again and again. And the whole world has to know that it is the only nation
China has to be
in
called
the whole
out.
world which is supporting terrorism and terrorists and a terrorist epicenter state like Pakistan. This had happened earlier also, as I said.
Absolutely. Terror epicenter, that is Pakistan. Aarti. Of course, sir. Aarti, you think we can really call out China and, in fact, use the opportunity. Ambassador Kapoor, I got you.
Thank you.
And use the opportunity of Prime Minister Modi's visit to Washington, D.C. and the kind of dialogue that's going to take place, the kind of consensus building that's going to take place, understandings that would be reached, the kind of cooperation, collaboration that's expected after this visit of Prime Minister between India and the United States? You think we can really coordinate and do more for the victims of terror, for victims of 26/11, for victims of other terror attacks that have been perpetuated by these organizations, Lashkar-e-Taiba, Hizbul Mujahideen, Jaish-e-Mohammed, that we really hold a mirror to the Chinese and read the Riot Act together as the world community?
Well, clearly,
Yes,
I think China is on the same path as the West used to be before September 11. Remember that the West ignored the threat of jihadist terrorism in the world until September 11 happened. And this whole problem actually has come to bite Europe, as we are seeing. We're seeing attacks on people from the jihadists in UK. We have seen how this problem of state-sponsored terrorism, especially Pakistan, which became the epicenter of Islamist terrorism, how it has unfolded and how it has spread across the world. I think China is on the same path, and it is going to make a huge blunder because it is actually going to side with a state sponsor of terror. Also, remember, China, under the garb of, containing terrorism in Xinjiang, if you remember, Xinjiang have been putting Muslims, ordinary Muslims, innocent Muslims in concentration camps and denying them their right to religion, right to identity and other fundamental rights.
Yeah.
So China actually has no locus standi whatsoever on this particular issue. Also, you remember that China was the country which armed Pakistan with nukes, and that threat is now a threat for the entire world. It has been repeatedly said at the United Nations by the United States, and I think this is where India and United States can partner strongly. This is where their intelligence network, intelligence sharing, and other efforts like FATF, as you rightly pointed out, those institutions will matter, and these institutions will isolate China repeatedly.
Right, Aarti?
Yeah.
Before I take this to Colonel Audzen in DC, let me go back to Einar for a bit. Einar, let's be honest and give us a moment of integrity. This is China. Abdul Rauf Asgar, accused of the IC-814 hijacking in 2001, the Pathankot terror attack in 2016. Abdul Rahman Makki, blocked in June last year from being designated terrorist. He was involved in 26/11 terror attacks. Masood Azhar, for 10 years, Chinese blocked his designation as a terrorist. Jaish-e-Mohammed chief, mastermind of Pulwama terror attack in which 40 of our brave soldiers lost their lives. Azam Chima, LET intelligence chief, trained 26/11 attackers. Sayyid Salahuddin, Hizbul Mujahideen chief. And all these terrorists are designated by the United States. In fact, in the case of Sajid Mir, he is designated by the State Department. He is designated by the US Treasury Department. He is on the most wanted list of FBI. He is accused of killing American citizens. He is in fact accused of killing citizens of at least 6 nations apart from India. It's not just that he is a wanted terrorist for India. I mean, the Chinese are really putting a finger in the eye of the world, not just of India. It's petty geopolitics, Einar.
Well, and yet the U.S. continues to give aid to Pakistan. So I assume that this is not an issue that's on the front burner for the U.S. All I can tell you is what China, Beijing is doing. They're insisting that these types of issues, where there are claims on both sides of state-sponsored terrorism, should be settled in an area like the SCO, Shanghai Cooperation Organization, rather than trying to grandstand at the UN. And that's their position. Whether you like it or not is another situation, but trying to...
Let me take this. Okay, that was, unfortunately, that was not the moment of integrity I was looking at from you, Inar. But then let me take this provocation that you have given. Let me take this to Colonel Audzen. Colonel Audzen, Inar is saying, okay, but the United States continues to give aid to Pakistan, continues to supply F-16 components to Pakistan. So what's the big deal if the Chinese are playing games with the world on terror?
That's not what I said.
Well, so the primary difference, I think, to address this point between how the United States and how China deals with Pakistan is this. We do have longstanding relations with Pakistan. We want Pakistan to be a successful country, a stable neighbor for India. We want them to have an affluent and functioning economy, but we will not adapt the ISI's definition and operational approach to terrorism. We simply won't. And the difference here with China is that for its own reasons, not only has it adopted a definition of terrorism that results in massive injustice to the Uyghurs and to other Muslims living in China, but it also seems to have adapted the ISI definition of terror, which is an interesting tool. Maybe this can be used to get political gains. The United States won't do that. We will have relations with Pakistan. We will try to keep balance, but we will not adapt that tolerance of people who bomb and shoot and kill civilians. We just won't do it.
Okay. Maybe, Colonel, to the misfortune of the world, the fact that we are rational people, we sort of try to balance things out. That's the reason why we perhaps fail to differentiate between ISI, or the fact that we shouldn't be differentiating between ISI and the Pakistani state policy of spreading terror. I think that's the unfortunate part of it. Perhaps that's the reason why Pakistan and its backer China continue to put the finger in the eye of the world. But hopefully this would not last long. And sooner than later, justice would be delivered to all these people, irrespective of whether they are designated as terrorists or not. I'm sure agencies would be working on that note. Thank you so much, our guest, for joining us. Ina joining us from Beijing, Colonel Rich Audzen from Washington, D.C., as also Ambassador Pradeep Kapoor and Aarti here with me in the studios. Thank you so much. Short break on the other side. Arnab Goswami is back with the debate.
Amity School of Communication has been ranked among India's top 5 mass comm institutes for the last 3 years by India Today, a testimony to its most high-tech studios, senior professionals as faculty and placements in leading media organizations. To apply, visit amity.edu.
Nation first means no considerations apart from putting India first. Nation first at Republic means chasing the story and telling it as the facts tell you it is before the nation. Nation first is confident